Good Sunday morning, everyone. Welcome to Sunday Morning Futures. I'm Maria Bartiromo. Today, governors fill the void. In the name of national security, state leaders are moving to stop communist China from abusing America. Coming up, Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin on his efforts to block the Chinese Communist Party from buying Virginia's farmland and stopping Chinese apps like TikTok and WeChat from potentially spying on the state government. Then the debt ceiling showdown has begun, and both sides are examining spending cuts needed to balance America's budget. West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin on what he's willing to support to unleash America's energy assets. Plus, the people of East Palestine, Ohio, are still reeling after Pete Buttigieg showed up 3 weeks after the train derailment and then claimed to be on private time as President Biden jetted off to Ukraine and Poland.
Are you going down there?
What's up?
Are you going down there at all?
Yep, I am.
When are you going?
I'll share that when I'm ready.
Okay,
I'll talk
thank
to
you.
Can I get a photo?
All of this as President Trump headed to East Palestine with water and supplies for the region.
We have told you loud and clear, you are not forgotten. You are not forgotten. We stand with you, we pray for you, and we will stay with you in your fight to help answer and the accountability that you deserve. The community has shown the tough and resilient heart of America, and that's what it is. This is really America right here. We're standing in America.
All of this as the 2024 presidential primary begins to expand this week. Coming up, one of the contenders, former UN ambassador and South Carolina governor, Ambassador Nikki Haley, on the race to the Oval Office. All of this as the most intense demonstration since the Islamic Revolution wakes up a sleeping giant as Iran's brutal regime tries to keep a grip on power. The exiled crown prince, son of the late Shah of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, here on whether there is a sea change underway in Iran and why the Biden administration is not supporting the protesters. It's all right here, right now on Sunday Morning Futures. And we begin this Sunday morning with the threat of communist China, now inside the gates of America. The nation's governors now are standing up in the name of national security amidst President Biden's soft approach on communist China, despite its provocations. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is pushing to ban Chinese real estate investments in Florida and CCP-backed social media app TikTok. In South Dakota, Governor Kristi Noem is leading a charge to block China from buying valuable farmland. Her efforts hindered last week with the state legislature rejecting the proposal under pressure from the state's major agricultural groups, afraid of China retaliation. And then in Virginia, Governor Glenn Youngkin poised to sign a bill to ban the CCP from buying farmland and bar TikTok on state-owned devices. Last month, Governor Youngkin pulled the state out of the running for a new $3.5 billion Ford Motor plant because the electric vehicle battery factory would have used technology made in China. Joining us now to examine the threat to U.S. national security is the man himself, Virginia Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin. Governor, thanks very much for being with us this morning.
Yeah, good morning, Maria. And the issues you've just raised are critical national security issues. And let's just be clear. China has one goal, world domination, to do it at the expense of the United States. They're using every avenue possible from, yes, saber rattling with their military to surveillance with balloons and TikTok. And from trying to infiltrate our economic supply chain by using Trojan horse relationships like the one they have engineered with Ford Motor Company. And in Virginia, we're standing up strong. We're going to make sure that our agricultural farmland is not purchased by the CCP. We've got a bill now through on a bipartisan basis that I will sign that will keep China from buying our agricultural farmland, particularly next to our nationally strategic assets like the Pentagon and Quantico and the largest naval base in the world. We're going to make sure that we keep these national strategic assets safe. We're going to make sure that TikTok isn't going to be used for surveillance with Virginia government employees. And Maria, we went to work to fully understand what was going on between Ford and a company called Cattle that is not just influenced, but controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, and to not allow them to use a Trojan horse structure to to gain access to taxpayer incentives that were put into the Inflation Reduction Act. This is using taxpayer money to further and enrich a Chinese company at the expense of America. And it's just not happening in Virginia. And I'm proud to say that we now see bipartisan legislators standing up on this issue and asking very difficult questions, as they should. This should be American supply chain that's trusted, not one that's outsourced to the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, it's just incredible how much reliance America has on China. And we saw that through the pandemic when the propaganda sites like Xinhua News and the Global Times came out and said, well, maybe we shouldn't send the prescription drugs to America that they need. So, Governor, what do you want to say to people like Tim Cook, Ray Dalio, Warren Buffett, who want to double down on investing in China, in doing so, expanding the strength of the CCP, funding their expansion? You've used your business acumen to actually make change. What about those CEOs that are looking at dollar signs in China, selling to the 1.4 billion person population?
Maria, through my business experience, I've actually sat across the table from leaders of the Chinese Communist Party. I know exactly what they're doing, and they are using their economic coercion tactics in order to gain access to our supply chain. And that's exactly what they did to General Motors back in 2016 when they demanded General Motors dump Korean battery manufacturer supplier in China and replace it with CATL, this Chinese manufacturer. We just need to have everybody wake up and understand that economic security for the United States is critical. And in these most important industries, like semiconductors, like EVs, like solar panel manufacturers, like all of the technologies that drive them, we must own that supply chain. In addition to our pharmaceutical supply chain, it must be American-owned, American-domiciled. Otherwise, we will continue to watch the Biden administration, in pursuit of their green agenda, sell out to the Communist Chinese Party, and we can't let it happen.
Well, it's unbelievable to me that we've had such a soft response. They obviously have a plan. And it's meticulous. They had that balloon fly over our installations, our military installations, nuclear installations. And you're telling me about CATL wanting to set up shop right near the Pentagon in Virginia, right near Quantico. Tell me more about that. How are they doing this?
Well, first of all, the Biden administration is allowing them to do it. And this is the big realization that I hope that our congressional oversight committees, American CEOs, and American people like Virginians now fully understand, that the liberal agenda will stand up to China until it gets uncomfortable. And the minute that it encroaches on their green agenda or their liberal agenda to take donations from China into our universities and other places, they will back down. And we must be tough here. We have to recognize that the ultimate objective of the Chinese, as I said, is world domination at the expense of the United States. They will continue to use every economic lever they can in order to do that. And that includes buying our agricultural land and farmland. That includes invading the economic supply chains of these most critical industries. I mean, they've been up to this for decades. Yeah. And we've turned a blind eye. And now we see the decade-long plan to dominate the minerals industry, to dominate the supply chain for electric vehicles, for solar panels, to dominate the supply chain for pharmaceuticals, to dominate the supply chain for next-gen computer science and technical supply chain. This is what they're up to. We stood up when they were trying to dominate the 5G supply chain and created trusted 5G capabilities. We have to do the same thing in these other most important supply chains. Well,
we know that they are also infiltrating our education system. You've done an incredible job in terms of education in Virginia, but we know what the CCP has done on the university level. Is this going to come up next week? Joe Biden is headed to Virginia. He still has not been to Ohio, and East Palestinian citizens are still reeling with those cancer-causing chemicals in the ground, water, and air, apparently.
Well, Joe Biden's been to Ukraine. Now he's coming to Virginia. He has yet to go to Ohio. And he wants to talk about health care. Why doesn't he go someplace where people actually have real health concerns that are driving them to worry about not just the day-to-day impacts of this horrific train crash, but the long-term impacts with cancer threats and et cetera. This is a moment for leaders to lead, and Joe Biden needs to lead here. And I just think it's really, really unbelievable that he is yet to go to Ohio and support these people that need the help. You know, the reality is when it comes to schools, Maria, we led in Virginia in 2021 and demonstrated that schools and parents are a Republican winning platform. And it's not because it's Republicans against Democrats. It's about empowering parents and recognizing that all parents, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, care about their children. And we've watched the liberals press children out of their parents' lives and try to intercede with bureaucrats and politicians to teach them what to think as opposed to how to think. And we have been standing up in Virginia, empowering parents, making sure that our curriculum is focused on teaching kids how to think, not what to think, raising the bar so that we can raise the ceiling and the floor, and making sure that we, in fact, are aware of what's going on in our schools. We just had Fairfax County purposely exclude parents from being told that their children had earned national merit accommodations because they didn't want kids to feel bad. Wow. We're watching equity stand in the place of excellence. And in Virginia, we are standing up to make sure that our children and their parents get an exceptional education and that parents are empowered, not just with a seat at the table, but a seat at the head of the table. Well,
real quick, you know, you've stood up to the teachers' unions. Joe Biden actually worked with them and had them making decisions during COVID in complete opposite to what you've done in terms of leadership. Governor, I know you have not announced a run for president yet, but are you planning to join the 2024 field?
Maria, I continue to be very humbled when this question is asked to me, and I continue to be very focused on Virginia. We have got a big budget to negotiate. You know, one of the realities in Virginia is we've managed well. We got a $3.6 billion surplus. That's the taxpayer money. That doesn't belong to government. And we've got tough negotiations to implement tax cuts and invest in the most important things that we've identified: education, law enforcement, behavioral health. My eyes right now are really on Virginia, and we've got a lot of good work to do here.
All right, Governor, it's great to talk with you this morning. Thanks very much. We'll be watching.
Thank you.
All right, Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin, thank you. Up next, from Virginia over the state line to West Virginia, where President Biden has declared the state's coal industry a thing of the past in his push for the climate change agenda, which will greatly benefit China as its necessary components are made in China. The chairman of the Senate Energy Committee, West Virginia Democrat Senator Joe Manchin, on why the president has chosen to side with Beijing over the coal miners in the Mountain State. That's next.
Guardians.
For sure, we ought to repeal it. But I think in addition, we ought to put tariffs on China in order to get the trade deficit to zero. We have transferred, let me just give you this number, about $6 trillion in trade surpluses to them in the last 20 years. $6 trillion. No rational person can now look at the situation and not see what's coming.
And that was former trade representative under President Trump, Robert Lighthizer, with me on this weekend's Maria Bartiromo's Wall Street over on Fox Business. The numbers show how much more the U.S. buys from China versus what China buys from the U.S., resulting in a $383 billion deficit with Communist China last year. It comes as President Biden pushes his green energy agenda, which sends production of that agenda to China, further benefiting the CCP, which controls about 60% of the world's lithium supply. The impact of Biden's war against the fossil fuel industry has caused economic hardship for many American families, with crude oil prices up 46%, gasoline up $1 a gallon since Biden took office. And the U.S.'s dependence on foreign oil has become a national security threat. Joining me right now is the chairman of the Senate Energy Committee. He is West Virginia Democrat Senator Joe Manchin. And Senator, it's wonderful to see you this morning. Thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, Marie. It's good to be with you.
What do you you think about what Lighthizer said in terms of China's most favored nation status? Would you support revoking that most favored nation status on China?
Absolutely. I think he's spot on. I know Mr. Lighthizer, and he speaks basically from his heart, and he knows what's going on, and I think he's spot on that. The bottom line is that China, Russia, don't have our values. They don't have our best interest at heart. I can assure you of that. We've allowed this to happen. It started way back when we let China come into the WTO, and it's expanded. And with the entrepreneurs and capitalist spirit that we have in America, a lot of our manufacturers went over there to get a better return on investment. Now we must make sure that we rebuild America, and we've got to do it here. And basically the incentives that we're putting in the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, was intended totally to give us all the energy that we need right here and use the processes of what we do in America to make sure that we're energy independent and we're secure to remain the superpower of the world. And you can't do it if you're depending on other foreign supply chains to produce your energy too. So this is what the bill's intended. This is what I'm stressing every day to make sure that happens, and watching the administration, how they administer it.
Well, so many issues to discuss with you, Senator. There are many people who feel that the Inflation Reduction Act does not, in fact, reduce inflation, and in fact, it's more spending, and part of the reason we're at 40-year highs in terms of inflation. But you said something so important just now in terms of the issues that America faces, and yet we've committed $113 billion to Ukraine. Is there any limit to what we should be giving Ukraine right now? And if you're willing to send more money to Ukraine, what are you willing to cut here in America?
Well, first of all, let me make sure that you understand that basically we're supporting Ukraine, and Putin, this horrific war, unprovoked war that he has leashed on Ukraine, cannot be tolerated in the world, in the free world. So we're going to support them, and hopefully in a bipartisan way, and I think there's strong support. We must maintain that strong support. But he used energy as a weapon. The United States of America was not energy independent. We couldn't help our allies quick enough. We saw what happened to the EU. They've changed completely, and looking at how they're trying to survive through the most difficult times, we're producing more LNG. So when we wrote the Inflation Reduction Act, if we put more oil, if we produce more oil in America, we should bring the prices down. That's the intent. This administration has sold that as an environmental bill only. It is an energy security bill. We're not going to be expanding all of the new technology for renewables as some people would wish, unless we have the horsepower to run our country. And we're not going to take something away or remove something until we have something that can replace it, can do the same job. That could be way far out. But this 10 years, Maria, is basically you produce more oil, more natural gas to reduce your price at the pump, reduce your price at your homes you're paying for your heating and your utilities that you use, all the things that we've done there. And then as we basically invest in the new technology of the future, hydrogen is going to be a tremendous horsepower for us. So you can walk and chew gum, but it's not been sold that way, and it's unfortunate. My main job right now is to make sure that they implement it and they don't use tactics to basically get around what the intent is. Use the energy we have in America. Don't depend on foreign supply chains.
Well, you also had a certain intention with regard to permitting that did not materialize. I want to ask you about that and about this conversation taking place right now in Washington in terms of where to cut back as we breach the debt limit. Let's take a break and come back on that. We continue the conversation with West Virginia Democrat Senator Joe Manchin. We'll be right back. And still to come later in the program, His Royal Highness, the exiled Crown Prince of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, is here, along with Republican presidential candidate Ambassador Nikki Haley. All to come. Back in a moment.
Greens from Force Factor.
Welcome back. I'm back with the chairman of the Senate Energy Committee, West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin. Senator, I want to get your take on the discussions underway right now about raising the debt ceiling. As you know, the Republicans would like to see some kind of boundaries and spending cuts identified. Let me ask you straight away, will you vote for a clean debt ceiling, no strings attached?
Well, I'm going to vote for a debt ceiling because we have to pay our bills. I hope my Republican friends will join us, and we're all in this together. But the bottom line, to say you're not going to have any discussions or negotiations on how we can get this debt under control, $31.5 trillion. In the last 10 years, almost $20 trillion. Can't we see how we expanded the debt so rapidly and find out if there's ways that we can make adjustment? You don't have to basically say and scare the bejesus out of people. Your first thing they go to is cutting Social Security and Medicare. That's not going to happen. But you can review all the spending that's gone on in discretionary, which means we have make decisions on, and non-discretionary, basically things that you don't negotiate on because it's mandatory spending. How did it increase by $1 or $2 trillion in such a short period of time? How did we increase discretionary spending? Can't we look at some of that and find out if there's some adjustments? We've got to get this trajectory down. You can't carry this debt, and we're doing that, and interest will eat us up. And Mike Mullins said one time with me in the Armed Services Committee that the debt of the nation is the greatest threat we face. Not another country, but the debt of our own, the weight of our own debt in our nation.
Yeah.
We've got to get this under control. We've got to speak about it intelligently. The bottom line is, Marie, everyone's trying to blame each other. You've got to work together.
Well, the CBO says that we're going to talk about $10 trillion in interest payments in the next decade as interest rates go higher. So just to be clear, you don't want a clean debt ceiling. You want to have a discussion and identify areas to cut with the agreement that you'll raise the debt ceiling. Is that what I'm hearing? You don't want a clean debt ceiling.
You'll have to raise the debts. You have to vote for this. We have to pay our bills, the full faith and credit of the U.S. currency. We're the superpower of the world. We have the reserve currency of the world is a U.S. dollar. We're not going to let that default any way, shape, or form. But in saying that, you mean we're not even going to talk about how we incurred this much debt so rapidly? Can we not find a way to have more efficiencies? I'm told if we just do our job on time, Maria, get our basically our budget done by the end of the fiscal year, September 30th, saves billions of dollars. I'm told also if we just commit to no greater than 1% in discretionary funding for the next 10 years, 1% can save like $1 trillion. Can't we at least talk about things that we should be able to come to agreement on and have a vote on later?
Is there a low-hanging fruit that you can identify? Is there a low-hanging fruit that you can identify right now that needs to be cut? Put that right on the table.
Well, you don't have to cut anything, but the bottom line is I can tell you I've had military people tell me, retired admirals and generals, that if we just did the budget on time, you could save 5 to 10% of basically the cost of the military. Not cutting the military at all, just saving through efficiencies. That could be $40 to $80 billion.
So where does the other money come from?
Can't we even look at that and see if it's fact?
Will revenue come from higher taxes then? Is that what you're saying?
And you don't have to do anything except do efficiencies of what we're doing and how we're doing it. Can't you look and see basically, let's say that we, in the last 5 years, that non-discretionary funding and discretionary funding has raised $1 trillion. How did we do that? Where did it come from? Why do we put things that we can't negotiate on? Why are we basically dispersing money? We knew during the pandemic we had to, and we did it in a bipartisan way, mostly. But with that being said, that's going to come down. Are we going to keep that spending when we don't need to right now? Are we going to continue to keep sending checks that we shouldn't be sending? These are the things that have to be looked at.
Senator, do you regret voting for that massive spending bill last summer? You were given a promise that your permitting would be in the bill. Chuck Schumer did not keep that promise. Do you regret it in retrospect?
Well, no, not at all. As far as the Inflation Reduction Act will be the most transformative bill that we've ever had in the United States in Congress as far as I've been there, because it's energy security. The administration hasn't sold it at that, but we've got to extract gas and oil from the Gulf of Mexico, from all of our lands that we own publicly. We have to extract basically all the critical minerals we're going to need for our own technology and batteries and things of that sort. It's basically used to bring things back to America. It's never been sold. People don't understand. They just say, and it's not a spending bill. We don't send a check to anybody. You have to have investments and credits. If people don't think that bill is working, then why is Europe so upset? Because everyone's coming to America now to make these investments. So
Senator,
it's going to be a great bill. And I worked with my Republicans for a long time to put this together. They just couldn't vote for it when it came out in reconciliation. I understand.
Real quick, before you go, I've got to ask you about your own public service. You've been in public service for 40 years. You told a radio interview this week that you will not be running for president. What are your plans? Will you run for re-election?
Well, the bottom line is that was in jest. They were talking back and forth. A dear friend of mine, Hoppy Kercheval, we talked, and he said, this minute, this time, this and this. And I said, Hoppy, listen, my main concern, and to you, all of you and all of your viewers, my main concern is how do we bring this country together? How do we make it work? How do we make Democrats, Republicans become Americans again and not just party affiliates? This is what's happening right now. We're pushing people further apart, making people take a side, and then we're rewarding for bad behavior. The country has to be about America and coming together.
Do you still identify as a Democrat?
I'll be involved any way I can.
Do you
I'll be
still
involved
identify
any way
as a
I can
Democrat?
to help. I identify as an American. I'm an American through and through.
Will you run for governor?
I'm going to do whatever I can to help my country come together and my state come together.
Senator, thank you. It's great to see you this morning. Senator Joe Manchin in West Virginia.
Good to be
we'll
with
be
you.
right back.
The NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, requires that the Biden administration disclose to the American people and to the Congress what is happening with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, that's the Iranian military, and what their weapons situation is. Are they continuing to arm Hezbollah, the Houthis, known terrorist organizations?
And that was New York Congresswoman Claudia Tenney on this program last week, demanding the administration update Congress on the threat of Iran's military. It comes as the Iranian people continue to fight for basic rights against Ayatollah Khomeini and his brutal regime. One of the leading voices in the call for freedom is the exiled Crown Prince of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, whose father was the last Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. During his 37-year reign, Iran enjoyed unprecedented economic growth and improvement in the standard of living. Now the country is in economic ruin as the mullahs in Tehran ignore the plight of citizens in pursuit instead of nuclear arms, which the regime claims it is close to achieving with weapons-grade material. Joining us right now is His Royal Highness, the exiled Crown Prince of Iran, Reza Pahlavi. And Your Royal Highness, thank you very much for being here this morning. We appreciate your time.
Good morning, Maria. I'm glad to be with you on your program.
So can you assess the current state of affairs? I know you want to talk a bit about what could be in Iran and the opportunity potential, but what would you say about the current regime?
It's becoming more and more fragile and fragmented, and this is because they are now faced with a new scenario. Until now, it was an era of sustained protest, but we have all of a sudden a completely new state of affairs under revolutionary fervor that Iran right now is, ever since the death of Mahsa Amini. And as I could witness over these months, Iranians have been all over the country united in one voice, calling death to the dictator, basically mean an end to the regime. And of course, Khamenei now has to face this new reality and is hoping desperately to cling on to power using, of course, repression as a means of intimidation and trying to maintain its avant-garde in the region as an extended element of intervention beyond our borders.
Yeah, I mean, by the way, they have also been calling death to America, and yet we have not seen a response from this administration. In fact, this administration wanted to get the United States back into the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. What would you like to see in terms of support from America?
It's important for America, among other countries in the West, to understand how close Iranians are in terms of values for freedom, for human rights, for equality, for non-discrimination. They are your natural allies in my country, unlike this regime, who is the total opposite. It has been from the very beginning anti-American and, most importantly, against every values of free and liberal societies in the Western world. You have with you the most natural force in place, which are the Iranian people, who until now have been fighting all by themselves. It goes without saying that movements that are based on nonviolent civil disobedience as a means for change have ultimately been successful with the help of the international community, particularly Western democracies.
Well, it is incredible because a free Iran could change the makeup of the Middle East. Do you think there is a path for a free and democratic Iran if the mullahs are gone?
That is the ask of the nation, but I would like to bring you back to the issue that is now the most element that would be critical in changing the paradigm, and that is to designate the IRGC as a terrorist organization. Why is this important? Number one, it cripples the regime even further. It gives more access to assets that could be frozen and then repurposed to support the Iranian movement at home, namely labor strikes that we need as an instrument of pressure from within. In other words, if the focus has been on maximum pressure, I'm advocating that there's a need now for a parallel track of maximum support in tangible means. This is something that will empower the people while it will limit the regime in its means of counter-reaction and repression. This is one path to getting us closer to where we want to be.
Well, this is a very important point that you make. The UK Foreign Office will not make it official. The Biden administration has not pushed the UK to deem the group a terrorist organization. And so what would you like to see in terms of the international group? I know that you are going to be speaking alongside leadership in Ukraine. Is there an opportunity there?
Well, as you may know, I'm on my third leg of a European tour, starting with the Munich Security Conference, and I had meetings with French legislators, senators in France, and of course some meetings here in England, which I'm currently here for. And one thing that is very important, Maria, for all to understand is that finally Western countries have decided to enter in a constructive dialogue with those of us who represent an alternative to this regime, because until now dialogue was limited to the regime as its representative. And our argument was, how could you possibly hope to find an answer to solutions when you keep talking to the people who have been part of the problem to begin with? So that's a welcome step. As a result, we can really discuss the mechanics of how change can come about, how the Western community can help us in this process, and understanding the transition of power from the current regime after it collapses during a transition phase leading to what we hope to be a future secular democratic system, which of course changes the entire scene in terms of opportunities for Iran's future, and particularly as it might be of interest to Iranian business and industries, which has been totally shut out of the equation as a result of a regime has been always with a policy of being anti-Western, which has in effect helped mostly and favored China in that dimension. So if we want to look back at what it means for the U.S. beyond just stability, which means that they won't have to worry too much about a military presence anymore, but it also means all of economic opportunities that the U.S. could be enjoying in a completely different sets of circumstances, and the demeanor of our country, which will of course be welcoming those kind of developments, because we need foreign technology, we need new industries, and we need to refurbish our existing infrastructure. For all of this, there's a big play for American companies, obviously.
But, Your Highness, I'm glad you mentioned the military, because the IRGC, the military, pretty much controls the economy. If you get rid of the mullahs, doesn't that lead to a military-led machine?
Well, actually, the military, let's separate the military from the IRGCs. In fact, the reason the IRGC was created in the first place was to make sure that the regime will be somehow protected from a potential military coup against the current regime, starting with what happened at the time of the Iran-Iraq war. So the perception should be that the military wants to be a professional army at the service of the nation and protecting our borders. And it has, in fact, a lot of sympathy among people. Unlike the IRGC, which is pretty much an installed mafia that is armed and controls just about every aspect of the country, which is why it's important that they be targeted. However, our scenario of change includes a scenario of transition, a transition that is based on truth and reconciliation, a transition that plans transitional justice. In other words, it offers an exit strategy for the bulk of those who are not benefiting from the existing mafia, which is really limited to the top ranks, and they want to start thinking in terms of how can we bail out and basically find survivability beyond this regime. This encourages them joining with the people and limit the regime in any hope of further repression, while it opens the door for a more peaceful transition without having less desirable scenarios which may take it in a wrong direction of violence and conflict, as opposed to help facilitate a much less costly transition and peaceful transition in our country.
Well, Your Highness, this may very well be an incredible moment in time, a pivot. We will be watching this, and it really is amazing to me to watch the courageous women leading this new revolution on the ground, risking their lives for the country. We so appreciate your leadership and joining me today. I hope you'll come back soon as this story
With pleasure,
develops.
Maria.
Thank you
so
so much, Your Royal Highness, the exiled Crown Prince of Iran, Reza Pahlavi. We'll be right back. The race for the White House is on, and Republicans are seeking to take back the Oval Office and undo President Biden's disastrous policies. Republican presidential candidate Ambassador Nikki Haley is next on what the GOP needs to do to return America to prosperity. Stay with us.
The 2024 election is our one shot to save our country, and we need a leader who is ready to do that on day one. And that's what we do. We stand up for America.
As somebody who has run enterprises before, I will run the federal government the way it needs to be run, by firing the people, dismantling the people, and shutting down the agencies that need to be shut down.
Welcome back. The field expanding for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination this week as entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy announced his candidacy, joining President Trump and Ambassador Nikki Haley in seeking to oust progressive Democrats from the Oval Office. The Republican National Committee announced its first presidential primary debate for the 2024 election this week. It will be held in Milwaukee in August this year, nearly a year before its convention in that same city. Under the Biden administration, America has dealt with one crisis after another, from record high inflation to a surge in migrants crossing the southern border illegally to the increased threat from communist China. America now at a pivotal point in its 246-year history. Joining me right now with what's at stake in 2024 is Republican presidential candidate Ambassador Nikki Haley. And Ambassador, it's great to have you this morning. Thanks very much for being here. You just heard President Trump and Vivek Ramaswamy make the case on why you can be the change agent in 24.
Yeah, it's time for a new direction, Maria. I think we need to leave the status quo of the past. I mean, you look at how America's falling into socialism. You look at how, this national self-loathing has taken over our country. And we've got real issues, whether it's $31 trillion in debt, whether it's that our children have fallen so far behind we don't know how to catch them up, whether it's security and crime on our streets or open borders, or the fact that our minds are being closed by woke ideology. The idea that we'd look up at the sky and see a Chinese spy balloon looking back at us. There's no shortage of issues. But what I will tell you is Americans want more. They want something different, and they want it now. And we can't do enough to make sure that Joe Biden's last days are ahead of him.
Well, we've been talking about foreign policy this morning. You did an incredible job at the UN fighting for America first. How will you differentiate yourself from the other candidates, and tell us your plan for foreign policy?
Well, one of the main things I did at the United Nations that I think is so important is I did a book that focused on the 193 countries, the percentage of time they voted with us, and how much foreign aid we give them. The number one thing I would do is stop giving foreign aid to our enemies. We give $46 billion in foreign aid. You're basically talking about $1 billion going to Iraq, who's basically dealing with the Iranians who are saying death to America. You're giving $2 billion to Pakistan, who are harboring terrorists trying to kill our soldiers. You're giving $500 million to Zimbabwe, the most anti-American African country there is. You look at China. We're giving China money for the environment. Are you kidding? We shouldn't be giving them a single penny. Belarus, who's holding hands with Russia in this war against Ukraine. And then you've got communist Cuba. We're giving them money, and we have designated them a state sponsor of terrorism. When I am president, we will no longer give foreign aid to our enemies. We will stop that. We'll start being smart, and we'll start being strong again.
Well, this is just extraordinary as we face off a $31.5 trillion debt load and are forced to actually raise the debt ceiling. Ambassador, I want to ask you about the domestic issues that we are all facing and living every day. So let's take a short break and then have more with Republican presidential candidate Ambassador Nikki Haley. Stay with us. Welcome back, and I am back with Republican presidential candidate Ambassador Nikki Haley. And Ambassador, I want to talk about some of the issues that American families are living with every day. 40-year high inflation and this wide-open border. We have new numbers from the border. 1 million people have been apprehended just since October. So we are seeing this flow of illegals coming into America and really depressing and putting big cities and states at risk because of the cost associated with it. What will you do should you become president about the wide open border?
Maria, every state has become a border state. We need to go back to the Remain in Mexico policy. We need to secure the border. But what we should do is do exactly what we did in South Carolina. We passed an Arizona-style E-Verify program that basically said no business could hire anyone that was in our country illegally. And if businesses did it, they were punished. That stopped everything in South Carolina. And when we do that across the country, it will stop all of those illegal immigrants thinking they can come here and make money off of U.S. taxpayers.
They're making billions every week on human trafficking and the drug trafficking. What are your other priorities right now, Ambassador?
Well, I think we have to look at the fact that if you're looking at inflation, let's stop the spending. I mean, I've never had a job in D.C., and I will tell you, I think D.C. is broken. They're spending like drunken sailors. They need to go on a diet. We need to start building things in America again. I took South Carolina and made it the beast of the Southeast.
Yes,
we need to start doing that so we can get the supply chain where we are. And we need to make sure we get education back on track for our kids.
Real quick, Ambassador, the whole Don Lemon thing, I know he said, oh, I hear you to the audience. He's apologizing to his viewers. Did he actually ever apologize to you?
You know, I mean, I think you look at it, and the liberals' heads explode at the thought of me getting into the race. I mean, what I said was, if you think I'm past my prime, hold my beer. We started selling koozies on NikkiHaley.com, and I think we turned lemons into lemonade, and I'll keep doing that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ambassador Nikki Haley. That'll do it for us. I'll see you tomorrow on Fox Business. Have a good Sunday.